Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LEC week number 2 overview and analysis video in the summer split. We are finally getting to see our returning teams from the internationals make their debuts here in the summer split, as Movistar KOI and G2 obviously did not play in week number 1, but we also get a better chance to see how these groups are starting to break out. Remember, all you need to do is not be bottom 1 in your group in order to make the next stage. That's easier said than done for some of these teams, but most of the really bad ones didn't end up playing this week, and so it should be fine nonetheless. I'm excited to talk about it. I hope you guys are excited as well. Let me know what you thought of the week down in the comment section below. What did you expect from these teams, and did it live up to your expectations? Curious to know your thoughts and feedback. You know, a little bit of a spoiler alert, not the craziest week in LEC history, but certainly at least one fun result that we can talk about. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. If you are new here, what we're going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each series that we cover, and at the end of the week, I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. We'll be updating my power rankings from number 1 to number 10, kind of overlooking the standings in each group, talking about who's in danger and who feels pretty good after the first couple series, but for the most part today, we will just spend a lot of our time talking about the games themselves. So I guess we can kick it off with day number 1 in our first series. Unlike week number 1, we had a bit of a shorter week here, not 3 days, but 2 days. It goes 6 series, 4 series, 6 series, 4 series, back and forth between the 4 weeks. Kind of a weird way to do it, but certainly not going to complain. A little bit of a shorter video here today after the crazy week that we've had on the channel. And kicking off day number 1 was maybe the least competitive series you'll see all split long. G2 Esports taking on Team Heretics, and G2 absolutely throttled them. Like, this was not even remotely close. There was nothing to like about this performance from Heretics. They just got completely outplayed in every single aspect of the game. Ridiculous stuff from G2 making their first appearance here in the summer split. Congratulations again to them for, you know, really rebounding, I would say, across the past couple of weeks after they were terrible at MSI, and quite frankly, they've been terrible throughout a majority of this year. I've been very vocal on this channel about how G2 just lacks an identity. They don't really know how they want to play the game, and it feels like a lot of the players kind of detract from each other in terms of their own individual playstyles, bot lane in particular, but they seem to have at least gotten better at being able to capitalize on enemy weaknesses and really just be able to show off their hands in a lot of these performances. Do I think that makes them better against like the best teams in the world? Definitely not. I think that makes them arguably worse against the better teams in the world, but against a team like Team Heretics that just doesn't have the firepower to go up against G2, at the very least, G2 are comfortable leaning in to a lot of their mechanical differences like they did in this series. But for Heretics, they just got slaughtered. There is nothing else left to say about this performance. Honestly, I don't even know how much time I can spend talking about these games. In these shortened weeks, I like to, you know, try and spend a little bit more time on each individual series, but like, what do I even break down when it came to this series? What do I even talk about? There's really nothing to go over. G2 just won in every facet. So I guess we can talk about player of the series. That for me is going to go to Caps in the mid lane, although it could literally go to anybody. Skumon got it on broadcast. I think that's totally fair. He was excellent here. I think both Hansama and Labrov played fantastic. This is their best series as a duo throughout this entire year. Maybe, obviously, it's hard to fully give them credit for that because everybody on the map was winning, but they certainly demolished Flakked and Stend, who are a competent bot lane on the other side of this. Broken Blade looked incredible in his first series back. He was styling on the Jax by the end of game number 2, really just hands checking everybody in the game. This was just one of those performances where it's a team player of the series and not so much an individual player of the series. Whoever you want to give it to, I think, is up to you, but quite frankly, Caps was looking like Chovy out here in this series in terms of just the lead that he was able to generate against maybe the weakest mid laner outside of maybe Abadaga in the entire league in Kamalu, and then his team fight impact. Annie, Orianna, these champions that can really make a gigantic impact once you start getting to the 5v5s. That's where Caps is going to be a massive menace throughout the rest of this split. It's where he's always been at his best as a player. As great as Caps is, he's never been this 1v1 lane dominant type of guy. He's always been phenomenal in the late game, and that's why G2 has always been one of the most consistent teams in the world in the late game. So not surprising to see him pick up Annie and Orianna and just completely crush the game on those 2 picks. But if you wanted to, like I said, if you wanted to give it to anybody else, up to you, man. Skumon absolutely dominated on the Pantheon in game 2. He massacred Team Heretics on the Poppy in game number 1. There was literally nothing TH could do. That pick ends up looking really good. I'm the biggest Poppy defender in the entire universe. I think that champion is Omega busted just based off of her kit alone, and it feels like every single team that ends up picking her up ends up making the most of it. Broken Blade, like I said, was great. The bot lane just had their best showing. They played played things like Jinx in game 1 and got fed, and then immediately swapped roles entirely and went to the Caitlyn in game 2. Kind of a little bit of both worlds for the two bot lane players. Game 1 much more Labrov paced, in game 2 much more Hansama paced, but both ended up working out for G2. A lot of that was Team Heretics completely running it down, but at the end of the day, you got to give credit where credit is due. G2 starting off the split in style, and for Heretics, like, okay, man, you got slaughtered, you made some terrible plays, you got completely hands checked. It is what it is. Like, these were 2 games that you just FF at 20. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's nothing else to say. You get shut out in game number 2. Dud of the series, take your pick, man. Like, genuinely, there's no right or wrong answer here. I think the only wrong answer would be Carlson on the top side. I think Carlson was fine, especially on the Cassante in game number 1. He just couldn't really do anything in that game. He ended up getting a bit mental boomed, I think, in game 2, and just perma-ulting the Jackson team fights on the Gragas and just kind of giving up. But I understand. It's not like the game was winnable. They were down 17-0 by the end of the game, so certainly wasn't a good look overall. But everybody else, I think, has a strong argument for being dud of the series. I'm giving it to Flakkid in the bot lane. I think it should go to one of the 2 bot lane players, either Flakkid or Sten. I think Sten's mistakes were more egregious. I think he was the one who ended up being a lot more, I guess, like, seeable in terms of the negative plays that he was making. The bad plays were, you know, run by Sten. I will definitely say that. But Flakkid, man, like, what is this? Gets the Yunara in game 1, gets completely shut down, gets picked off over and over again, and ends up losing the game. And then game 2 is staring down the barrel of Pantheon, Jax, and, you know, Bard, and even Orianna, all of these disruptors, and decides to pick Misfortune. Like, this has to be one of the biggest troll picks of all time. There is literally no way that MF could ever play this game, and he got picked off over and over and over again. I don't think he was able to channel a bullet time for more than 2 seconds throughout this entire game. There was nothing that he was capable of doing, and it was, quite frankly, entirely his fault for opting into this matchup. So he's going to get dud of the series for me. I'm a big fan of Flakkid, or at least a moderate fan of Flakkid. This was terrible, the worst he's looked in a while. But again, it should go to one of the 2 bot lane members. Not to say that Sheo and Kamalu, you know, deserve, you know, any sort of flack, or I guess any sort of flack taken off of their backs in terms of how they played this series, because they were also miserable. Sheo got mega jungle gapped and then ended up making hero plays in game 2 that led to Team Heretics not being able to play the game. Kamalu was, you know, an ERL player in comparison to Caps in terms of how he played the laning phase. He even got his signature Victor and played a super slow scaling laning phase against Orianna and was still down a ridiculous amount of resources. It was just a nightmare for Heretics. They didn't look competent in any respect going up against G2, and that is concerning. This might actually be a bottom 3 team. You know, Vitality was a team I didn't have a lot of confidence in. Heretics certainly looked worse than them in this one. But G2 starting off their split, like I said, with a bang, an absolute demolition of Team Heretics. They look just about as good as you could possibly ask for from them. Then moving on to our second series and the second debut that we have here across the summer split. Our defending champions getting their first bit of action as we saw Movistar KOI taking on GIANTX. And somehow, someway, Movistar KOI are going to come out on top. This was a banger of a game number 3. It really did feel like this was going to be nearly impossible for GX to lose, and yet they end up making some crucial errors down the stretch of the game. I think people are going to forget that this team played incredibly well for basically a game and a half against the defending champions and just look at the negatives that ended up happening. But quite frankly, this was an encouraging series for GIANTX. I think this is the best that they have looked all year long, and I'm not going to be the one that's super negative on the fact that they threw game 3. It's obviously super frustrating that they threw game 3, and if they're not good in the later parts of games, then it doesn't matter how good they look in the beginning. But this is the defending champions who had a lot to prove coming out here in their first performance, and GX, quite frankly, outplayed them for a majority of this series. For KOI, I expected a lot more, but at the end of the day, when you've got a bot lane that's performing this way, it's pretty difficult to lose games. Supa and Alvaro stepping up when they needed them the most. Whoever you want to give player of the series to out of those two, I think it's kind of up to you. I'm giving it to Alvaro because the engages are just so perfect. It's almost incredible how regular this guy steps up when down in resources. We talk all the time, and this is kind of a ubiquitous statement about League of Legends, but a lot of players in the LEC in particular are really bad at playing from behind. And, you know, that's just generally League of Legends. It's much harder to play from behind. Most players are going to struggle when they don't have resources. Somehow, someway, Alvaro has kind of flipped that on his head. Not that he's bad from ahead or anything like that. He's so good at playing from a deficit that you can never really count KOI out of any of these games because you can pretty consistently assume that Alvaro is going to be making plays that are going to get them back into the game. And that's what he's always been doing. He was excellent across this entire series. You look at the game 2 on Rakan, but specifically this game 3 on the Alistair, absolutely sensational. Really, at this point, I think he's making a strong case to be considered the best support in Europe, and I think Mickey X obviously has held that for a very long time, but is Alvaro not more proactive and more important towards his team's success right now? You know, we'll have to see with Mickey X. Obviously, Fnatic have started off strong once again. We'll see how things go in the playoffs, but at least for now, Alvaro has got to be up there, and he's certainly one of the better players in the entire league, and he couldn't do it without Supa also following up. This guy has also become incredibly clutch for KOI. You want the reason that this team ended up becoming champions? Yes, Elyoya was excellent in their playoff run, and Jojo Pune, I think, stepped up against a lot of the best mid laners, but Supa was the best player for KOI in the playoffs during their championship run last split, and he continues to be a massive figure. He was super down on Noah in terms of resources, and that's partly because GX's bot lane was just better for a majority of this series in terms of how they played the 2v2, but even down in resources, Supa ends up getting a glimmer of hope with Alvaro's setups, and he takes full advantage of it. He was better than Noah when it mattered the most down the stretch of game number 3, and he ended up really being influential. You have to give all the credit in the world to this KOI bot lane. They do not win this series. They don't even stay alive in this series at times without these two playing as well as they did, because I don't think the rest of the map played well. I think Jojo Pune had a pretty rough series, all things considered. I don't think he played well in his re-debut in the LEC, and typically speaking, when Jojo underperforms, this team does not win. They don't win very often when he is not strong in the mid lane. He really is that kind of focal point, but Mirwin also kind of struggling to stay relevant on the top side, looked bad on the one, I guess it's not even off meta, but one carry pick that he got in game number 1 and then got put on tank duty the rest of the series and couldn't really do anything. Elyoya had a couple of big moments, but also was really only there to enable the bot lane. This really just came down to a 2v8 for Supa and Alvaro, which they ended up winning. But as for GX on the other side, again, I'm not going to sit here and tear them to shreds like everybody else in the community is going to. I think this is encouraging. The fact that they were even good enough to compete with Movistar KOI means that they are better than people think they are. That is the end of the story, at least from my perspective. Do you want to see this team figure things out going into the late game? Yes. Is Noah starting to develop a reputation where he's choking in big moments? Yes, I absolutely am concerned by that. But Noah and Jun have proven that as a bot lane duo, from a mechanical perspective, they can go up against anybody in Europe and hold their own. And as long as you're able to get the yips out of Noah in terms of how he plays the late game, they could be a top 1, top 2 bot lane in the LEC. Like, again, I know that's a caveat, filled sentence. As long as you're able to get the yips out of Noah, there's no guarantee that that will ever happen. Maybe, that's just going to be who he is, but from a talent perspective, it is so clear that Noah and Jun can carry GX to being a Worlds team if everything were to click. The problem is everything else is not clicking right now. I think Lot and Isma were totally fine in this series. I really have no major negatives to give them. At times, Isma was better than Elyoya. At times, he wasn't. Like, that's how facilitators go, especially on things like Maokai. Same thing for Lot on the top side. I think he had more agency when he was playing tanks than when he was playing the Rumble in Game 3, but it kind of is what it is, right? It all really came down to the carries, and that's been the question mark here is, can Jackie's Noah and Jun be good enough to, carry a team to being in contention for top 4 or something like that? I think they are talented enough, and Jackie's was also able to generate a pretty big lead on his own on the Yone. The problem is all of them ended up underperforming. As much shit as Noah is getting because of his reputation, I think Jackie's was worse down the stretch. I think his lead was less large. Like, Noah dominated this series and was able to generate gigantic leads for himself and then made a couple of mistakes down the stretch. Jackie's generated a moderate lead, I would say, for himself, and then made a pretty big decision and mistake down the stretch, giving over that shutdown, that 1k gold shutdown on the Yone that really ended up turning the game around for KOI in terms of the resources they received. I'm just not impressed with the way that Jackie's is playing the game in that same kind of way. I still think he was fine throughout this series. I'm really not going to be all that frustrated with him because he was able to generate a lead against Jojo, and I think that's usually a recipe for success against KOI, but at the end of the day, someone had to get done of the series, and I think Jackie's made the most mistakes in the back half. But again, if you really want to give it to Noah, you know what? No, I'm not going to opt into saying if you want to give it to Noah, you can. You can't. He's not dead of the series. He was the only reason that GX was in this series at all. This guy is absolutely dominant. Jun is certainly one of the best supports in the entire region. I would say top 3, top 4, no matter what, right? It's Mickey X, it's Alvaro, it's Targamas, and it's Jun. Those are the 4 best supports in the LEC, and I don't think you can really argue that anybody else is in that discussion at the current moment. And then Lot and Isma did everything they needed to do in order to set up the rest of the team. Isma, in particular, just came down to the carries not performing the way you wanted in the back half. But again, I can only be optimistic about a team that we looked at as being nowhere close to competing with the upper echelon, actively being better than MKOI in this series. If they continue to do that and just weed out some of the mistakes, they can still be a team that ends up making a miracle run in the playoffs. And for KOI, they're going to be lucky to walk out of this series with a victory. They definitely need to show something different going into series number 2 later on in this week, or else I am going to start getting concerned about them. But then moving on now to our second day of the week, our second half of the week, and kicking off day number 2 was a matchup between Fnatic and Team BDS, where Fnatic is going to pick up the 2-0 series win. They're not going to drop a single game to BDS, and I think at this point it is clear that Fnatic, at the very least for now, feels upgraded over what they were last split and the last couple of years with Humanoid in the mid lane. Poby has settled in very nicely, and I'm not going to say he's brought the T1 macro over with him. I don't think it's entirely Poby that has completely rewritten what this team wants to do, but this was a very T1-esque series overall for Fnatic, where they just controlled space incredibly well, generated leads individually in terms of what their gold leads were. Specifically in the jungle, there was a massive canyon in game number 2, and then once they got objectives and once they started setting up around the map, they just started to strangle out BDS. They didn't necessarily need a bunch of chaotic, crazy fights in order to generate leads. They just out-tempoed BDS in terms of what they were on the map, and BDS looked lost in terms of this performance. It did not feel like they had a good idea or understanding of what they needed to be doing on the map at any given point, and I think it really ended up coming back to bite them. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Razork is going to get player of the series for me. It was going to be difficult to go in any other direction, but Poby definitely gave it a college try in terms of how he went. But if you flame Horizon your opponent in the jungle on Poppy, yeah, you're probably player of the series. It just kind of is what it is. What a series and what a game 2 from Razork. It's not like game 1 doesn't deserve to be shout out, because I think he was awesome there as well. But again, I can't reiterate this enough. He flame Horizoned Bukata in the jungle on Poppy going into Sejuani. He was up over 100 CS throughout this game. Absolutely ridiculous. That should never be possible in the jungle, especially with this matchup, but Razork was just so far ahead in that ubiquitous tempo idea that I talk about. The fact that they're always first at setting things up, always a little bit quicker on their map movements, always a little bit more in control of the pace at which the game ends up moving, and that's really what ended up being the difference here. Razork looks like a completely reinvigorated jungler right now, but he's looked like this before with Humanoid. I'm not going to rule out the fact that Razork just sometimes shuts down in the playoffs, and that's something that could potentially continue to happen, but at least for now, Razork looks like the player who is benefiting the most from Poby coming in and from Humanoid going out. But Poby has been excellent in the mid lane individually. This guy's mechanics are clearly good enough to be playing in the LEC. You know, I said this in the primer, and I felt really bad about saying this because I think LEC fans maybe would take this the wrong way, but it's the case for North America too. I'm not trying to say that the West is, you know, any different across the board, but it is quite staggering how players who are considered fine, like below average, maybe slightly average to below average, like mechanically in the East, especially in Korea, can come over to the LEC and the LTA and just be the best mechanical players here. Like, it just is what it is. Poby, not necessarily known for his mechanical dominance down in the Challengers League, and he was quite outclassed at the LCK level, but he comes over here to the LEC, and it's quite clear he's just going to be one of the most talented mechanical mid laners in the entire region. We've seen this out of players like Noah, we've seen this out of players like Rahel, we've seen this out of players like Jun, even in the support position, even Ice, like on the other side of this matchup, I think is a great example of a player who looked below average mechanically speaking domestically when he was in Korea, comes over to the LEC, and it's clear his mechanics and teamfights are better than everybody else here. It just is the way that it is in Korea, and I think people overestimated the fact that Poby wasn't great mechanically speaking in Korea. I think it's clear that the mental side of the game is there for him, and he has quite frankly just been able to dominate a lot of the mid laners at this level so far. We questioned whether or not that was going to be sustainable because he went up against Kamalu and Abadaga in week number 1, so not exactly the toughest of competition, but Nuke is a truly good mid laner at this level, and Poby was significantly better than him. So mid jungle looks very strong for Fnatic right now. Bot lane is still, in my opinion, the best in the entire league. I wouldn't take anybody over Upset and Mickey X. I don't think they have the biggest like killer instinct of any bot lane in the league, especially Upset, who I think can sometimes lack the ability to dive forward and look for the gigantic play, but he likes to play it safe. I think sometimes that works. If the rest of your team is going to be as good as they have been, that certainly works, but, you know, come playoff time, we do want to see him be able to turn it on and kind of become the #1 guy for this team, especially on things like Yunara, but I'm really nitpicking. They're still exceptional, and Oscar Renan was also fine this series. Don't love the Yorick in game 2. I think that does limit his capabilities, but at the end of the day, if he was the weak link here, you're going to be just fine. And for BDS on the other side, Nuke is the clear choice for dud of the series. He comes out and, you know, very vocally gets into a conversation with Poby on Twitter before this, talking about how he's only walked the worst mid laners in the league and that Nuke is not going to, you know, be the same kind of, in his words, monkey that falls over, stupid monkey, and he even promised that he would change his in-game name on the server to Stupid Monkey if he did lose to Poby. Well, here you go, 0-5 5-5 was not particularly useful across these two games. Unfortunately for Nuke, he just couldn't quite back up what he was talking, and it really just goes to show how good Poby is. I think Nuke is kind of the barometer right now in the LEC. I think the best mids are going to be able to beat him consistently as they have been throughout his entire career, but bad mids just lose to Nuke. Like, he is significantly better than anybody who's considered average in the position, so he really is that test, and I think Poby very much passed it here, unfortunately for Nuke. That ends up reflecting pretty negatively onto him. I think Bukata is the other player you consider for dead of the series because, again, I can't repeat this enough. He got Flame Horizoned in the jungle on Sejuani. Really not an acceptable performance. Bukata looks like he has not been a huge upgrade over 113 in terms of what he is so far for BDS. Maybe against weaker competition that ends up changing, but for now, I am concerned. Ice and Paris, I don't think looked great here. Upset and Mickey are absolutely the better bot lane. If Ice can't get into the late game on Aphelios and Smolder, he's just not going to be useful. But that's Ice as a player just in general. And then Rooster was basically a non-factor throughout this entire series. I still like him as a player, but he really didn't do anything here. So for BDS, they honestly don't look like I thought they would. I thought they were going to be a huge upgrade over what they had been previously this year, but it just feels like a slight upgrade. I still think that they are better than what they were in the spring split, but maybe not top 5 better. And Fnatic might not even be bottom, like, 1 in terms of the top 4. Like, this might actually be a team that finally has the talent and the mentality in particular to compete for a championship. And if that's going to be the case, Fnatic fans are going to rejoice because they've been begging for that result for a very long time. But that's going to bring us to our final series of the week here, and it is the big rivalry right now in the LEC. I would argue that there is no rivalry that I care more about right now than these two teams. It's K-Corp taking on Movistar KOI. And K-Corp is going to pick up the victory here, 2-1. And, you know, I feel pretty good about this one. I'm not going to take a huge victory lap, but I had K-Corp number 1 in my power rankings coming into this split. I don't think that was the most consensus opinion of all time. People in the comments actually seemed pretty open to the idea, and, you know, I definitely hope I sold it well in terms of how I talked about it in the primer video. But here you go. If you want a reason why K-Corp should be considered the number 1 team in the LEC still, this is it. I think on paper, anything less than a number 1 finish for K-Corp would be considered a disappointment for how talented their roster is and how well some of these players are playing right now. And KOI, I think, just kind of figured that out. They didn't have the firepower and they underperformed in some key moments down the stretch of this game, and K-Corp, quite frankly, was just better. Now, do I think this means it's guaranteed to go this way in the playoffs? Obviously not. K-Corp was the best team in the regular season last split as well, and they ended up not making MSI. So you don't want to make too many promises, but it looks pretty damn good right now. Targamas is going to get player of the series. What a Nico game in game 3. From Targamas, it was ult after ult that ended up being consequential for him, and honestly, I am guilty at times of being undervaluing Targamas. I think that is the fair way for me to word it in terms of how things have gone down. I think that there are plenty of times where I need to be a lot more vocal about just how important he is for the team. I think I give a lot of credit to players like Kalist and Kana. Even Yike, I think, is really important for this team, but Kana and Kalist are the 2 best players in the LEC right now, and so sometimes it can feel like the rest of the players on the team don't get nearly enough credit in that regard, but Targamas is an upper tier support. He's right up there with all of these other players that I continue to glaze, like Alvaro on the other side, like Jun, like Mickey X in terms of the support position. It's a big 4, and he deserves to be considered in that upper echelon. I'm not willing to say he's definitely better than everyone there, but he certainly outplayed Alvaro, at least on this particular day, which is a really good sign. Again, Targamas being very good and being a gigantic playmaker for this team really does elevate them to a level that I don't think they were at in the playoffs, especially in the previous split. But lucky for K-Corp, it's not just Targamas, it's still everybody else on the map really stepping up and playing well. Kana continues to just be an absolute monster, mechanically speaking. This guy is so much better from a hands perspective than anybody else in the top lane in the LEC. It actually is quite crazy to watch. Kana is just I think he's the best player in Europe. Like, I don't even think it's close. I think he is the most talented and the most aggressive and the best mentality and really good macro, good team fighter, good laner. Like, he's the best player in Europe. He just happens to be a top laner, which means that oftentimes he can't always 1v9 the game to completely change things around, but Kana is absolutely on fire right now, and I think he continued that in this series. Kalist was good at following up on everything Targamas created. I think Supa was good on the other side as well. I think he was probably the best player on KOI in this series. It just didn't really end up mattering. Vladi and Yike were solid. Yike gets a game 3 win over their arch rivals on Vi. Certainly a fun little narrative considering how he's been viewed, but overall it's just a big win for K-Corp, kind of proving that they still deserve to be considered an upper tier team, and quite frankly kind of proving me right to consider them the number 1 team team in the LEC still. And then for KOI on the other side, unfortunately, this team kind of went back to being what they were before they went on that miracle run in the playoffs, which is to say a very inconsistent team that just seems to struggle when they don't have the resources that they need. And they make a lot of mistakes. This team is not perfect. They are certainly a team that's going to, be a bit more inconsistent in terms of their gameplay because of just their style of play. Alvaro is so important in terms of a lot of these engages when they're not going well or when the enemy team can keep vision on Alvaro in particular. It's really tough for him to be able to function and create the same kinds of advantages he was able to do in the playoffs. Alvaro was completely outplayed by Targamas in this series. I'm not afraid to say that. But it wasn't him that was the biggest problem, in my opinion. That's going to go to Jojo Pune, who quite frankly just did not have a very good debut week here in the summer split. His Orianna looked tragically bad, and he's never been all that good on these types of champions. He's always been a bit more average as a control mage player, but man, I was really hoping that he was starting to turn that around. It really did feel like he was going to be a bit more consistent as a control mage player after the spring split. That is not the case here. He did not feel comfortable. He was whiffing ultimates. Now, I will give him credit. He hit one giant shockwave around the Elder fight, and that almost won KOI the game. But at the end of the day, if you miss 3 ultimates and hit one that does really matter and it still loses you the game, then you were still a problem in that game. So for me, he's going to get done of the series because I also think his game 1 on the Yone was also not good enough. And that's coming off the back of a series against GX where I also don't think he was very good in lane in that performance. So a lot to build on for Jojo that he needs to get back under because right now it doesn't feel good, at least in week number 1. He can be streaky though. I'm expecting him to be fine going into next week, but he does need to kind of show it next week. I think everybody else here had some pluses and minuses. Elyoya couldn't land a smite to save his life, but he played some of these fights really well, especially on the Poppy in game 2, so I can't give him dead of the series. Mirwin was thoroughly outclassed by Kana, but I don't think he made it enough of a problem for KOI to just instantly lose, and Supa was genuinely very good for this team in this series. It's just that K-Corp is better. They have better hands, and they had better execution in this series. They had a better playmaker, and they were able to play from ahead, and that's why they ended up coming out on top. This is what happens when the 2 best teams in the league go head-to-head. You end up kind of learning a lot more about where each of them sit, and right now, I feel pretty darn good about where my power rankings were going into the week. All right, but that is going to do it for my LEC week number 2 overview and analysis video in the summer split. Up on the screen, the updated standings for both groups after 2 weeks of action. We have a much clearer idea of where teams are sitting, but like I said before, the bottom team still not performing this week. All 3 of the bottom 3 teams in my power rankings not playing a single game in SK, Navi, and Vitality, so we'll have to see how they pick up in week number 3, but the top of the standings at the very least starting to get a lot more clear. For Group A, it's K-Corp that's running away with it. For Group B, it's Fnatic, but you can see how I personally judge those standings with my personal power rankings, which you can see to the right of every single team. Change is going to be how they have changed from last week to this week. We can go over risers and fallers, but I'm going to talk a bit more in depth about just why I'm not making certain decisions. First and foremost, K-Corp, of course, staying at number 1. They've been number 1 all split, and they just proved it by beating KOI. I feel really good about that decision, and right now I feel like K-Corp is the best team in the league, but the team I feel is the closest to them is once again the Kings of Europe, G2 Esports, coming back to try and reclaim their throne. I just felt so good after their win. I think this team is incredibly motivated right now. I don't think they're world beaters. I still think they have a lot of things they need to fix, but I think right now, it's hard for me to feel differently about G2 other than, well, it's G2. They're going to figure it out, and they're going to win Europe going into Worlds. It's just kind of what this team does every single year. So, bare minimum, I wanted to put them in my top 2. KOI is going to move down to number 3. They did not look very good this week. I still think they're going to be fine. They were lucky enough to pull out the win against GX, but it was pretty realistic for them to walk out of this week going 0-2. And if that was the case, I would be kind of panicking and putting them back down at number 4, because that's kind of what they were for a majority of the year in terms of the power rankings. For now, I'm going to hold on and put them at number 3, but Fnatic at 4 is certainly not feeling like a 4th place team. They are 3-0 in the regular season. They look fantastic with Poby kind of revitalizing that mid lane position, and everything's really going right for them. The only concern I have is they have yet to face G2, and if they can go and beat G2, yeah, they're jumping up to number 2. KOI is falling to number 4. Like, that's just the way things go. I'm really excited to see how that breaks down for the rest of the split, but as for the bottom of the power rankings, GIANTX is actually going to leapfrog BDS. Again, people are really low on GX because they threw that series against KOI. I'm tending to look at it a bit different. They outplayed KOI for basically an entire series and just made some mistakes at the end there. They were a couple of plays away from just beating the defending champions in their first series back. That would have been massive. I'm moving this team up to number 5. Right now, they are clearly the best of the rest, in my opinion. And then that means BDS is moving down to number 6. This might even be too high. This team is competitive, but they're not particularly good. I just think the bottom 4 are all kind of bad, so BDS is still going to stay at number 6. Heretics, of course, is going to stay at number 7 because the bottom 3 didn't play, but they are on thin ice after getting absolutely demolished by G2 in their matchup. So I'm curious to see how that ends up breaking down, but let me know what you agree with or disagree with in terms of the power rankings down in the comment section below. But let's go ahead and move on to my player of the week and my dud of the week for week number 2. Player of the week for me was kind of tough, but I honestly ended up landing on Razork, the jungler for Fnatic. It really was the Flame Horizon in Game 2 on the Poppy that ended up pushing it over the top, but he was sensational in both of their games against BDS. It was him or Caps, and I think it's kind of up to you who you want to give it to, but I thought Razork was just a bit more individually impressive, whereas G2's win was mostly a team effort. That being said, Caps is still going to be my second honorable mention here, my first honorable mention, second place in the MVP voting for week 2. He was awesome. G2 in general absolutely slaughtered Team Heretics. If they're going to play like that, they are going to cruise to an LEC title, and it does feel like this team has genuinely gotten better. And then Targamas is going to be my other honorable mention here. He played awesome against KOI, and he was really important for them to be able to pick up that Game 3 win. It really does feel like the re-emergence of Targamas does feel quite real. Would that be the case on other rosters? Who knows? But right now, it feels good on Corp. So Targamas and Caps are going to be my honorable mentions. And then my dud of the week, very obviously, it's got to go to one Heretics player. I'm giving it to Flakked because he was dud of the series for me. But really, this is a Team Heretics dud of the week in terms of how things played out. They were so freaking bad in their matchup against G2. It actually was ridiculous. If that team is going to play like that at any other point throughout the rest of this split, that's, right down there with SK and with Na'Vi in terms of the worst teams in the entire league. So need to see more out of Heretics, but for now, Flakked is dud of the week and Razork is going to get player of the week. But that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We're going to be posting about every single week of the LEC, and then, of course, going into playoffs as well. But we cover all 3 of the other major regions on this channel as well. So LTA North, LCK, and LPL. We also cover the NACL Tier 2 over in North America every single week, and, a lot of these leagues are starting up their playoffs quite soon. North America's basically already there, so stick around if you want that kind of information. Of course, small plug, we've also still been casting for LPL English basically every single week. Links to that will be in the description. You can see the YouTube and the Twitch link down there. Subscribe, follow, depending on the platform, if you are interested in seeing me cast live, or if you're interested in the LPL, that is the place to go and watch it. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. Hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all